Welcome everyone to a series of Shiurim in Hashkafa. Tonight's topic is what we can prove about God. Now, for those of you who believe that you can't prove the existence of God, or that in order to believe in God you need a leap of faith, tonight's shiur is going to come as a great surprise. So let's begin. I'll begin with a mathematical riddle. Let's take a stick 12 inches long. Chop that stick in half. Now you have two sticks 6 inches long. Chop those two sticks in half, and now you have 4 sticks 3 inches long. Keep chopping those sticks, and chopping and chopping and chopping. 4 inches, 8 inches, 16, 32, 64. Keep going and going and going. How long can you chop those sticks for? And how many sticks can you chop that 12 inches into? Infinity. Okay. A 12-inch stick can be chopped into an infinite amount of points. Fair enough. Next question. Take a football field made of 100 yards. Chop that football field into 2 football fields, both of 50 yards each. Take those 50 yards and chop them into 25 yards and chop and chop and chop and chop and chop. How much can you chop that 100-yard football field into? Also infinity. So a 12-inch stick could be chopped up into an infinite amount of points, and a 100-yard football field could also be chopped up into an infinite amount of points. So now I have a question. If you have an infinite amount of points arranged side by side to each other, are you going to have a 12-inch stick or a 100-yard football field? Which one is it? If A divided by B equals C, then C times B equals A. So if you're telling me that you could take a 12-inch stick and you can make it into an infinite amount of points, that means if you take an infinite amount of points, put them side by side, you get a 12-inch stick. But if you're telling me that if you take a football field of 100 yards and chop it up, you can chop it up into an infinite amount of points, then if you take an infinite amount of points and put them side by side, what you're going to get is a 100-yard football field. So which is it? If both could be chopped up into an infinite amount of points, what you're telling me is that a football field and a 12-inch stick is the same size. And that's absurd. The answer is that you cannot chop up neither the football field nor a 12-inch stick into an infinite amount of points. And the reason you can't do it is because no matter how many times you chop that stick or you chop that football field, and no matter how large the number of sticks or slices you're going to chop it into, the number will always be a finite number. No matter how many times you chop, because there is an endless supply of finite numbers out there, you'll never finish the amount of finite numbers. So no matter how long you chop, and you keep chopping and chopping and chopping, and you can keep chopping forever, you can keep chopping and never stop. But no matter how many times you chop, the number of slices will always be finite. That's the answer. Infinity is not a big number that if you count long enough, you'll be able to reach it. Infinity is not a number. Infinity means the unreachable. Infinity is something that you could never count up to. If you count and count and count and you keep counting forever, if I come back to you in 10 billion years and you're still counting, you're still going to be counting finite numbers. Because there is an endless supply of finite numbers, you will never finish all the finite numbers in order to reach infinity. And so no matter how much you chop that football field into, and no matter how much you chop that stick into, it'll always be a finite amount of chops. And this is the beginning of what we need to know about God, because if we say that God is infinite or God is not finite, we may as well know what infinity means. Another example that illustrates the same point. Let's say you have a hotel. Hotel with an infinite amount of rooms, fully occupied. No vacancy. You come into the hotel and you tell the manager in the lobby that you want a room. Manager tells you there's no room, there's no vacancies, it's fully occupied. So you tell them, well, look, I have an idea. There's an infinite amount of rooms here, right? So here's what you do. You take the person in room number 1 and you put him in room number 2. You take the person in room number 2 and you put him in room number 3. So on and so forth, so you move everybody up one room. Infinite amount of rooms, right? Infinity plus 1 is infinity. So just keep moving everybody up, and I will take room 1. Next guy comes in and has the same idea, and everybody moves up a room, and he takes room 1. And you can do that forever. So we have a strange thing, strange meaning, absurd. You have a hotel that's fully occupied, no vacancies yet. It has an infinite amount of vacancies. The answer is, you can't have a hotel with an infinite amount of rooms. No matter how many rooms you have in that hotel, it's going to be finite. You cannot have a hotel with an infinite amount of rooms. You cannot have a desert with an infinite amount of sand grains. You can't have a sky with an infinite amount of stars. There's no such thing as no matter how many stars you have, it's still a finite number. You can still add, and you can continue adding and adding and adding sand and adding and adding and adding jelly beans to a bowl forever, and you can continue adding so that you will never stop adding. However, no matter how many jelly beans you have in that bowl, no matter how many grains of sand you have in that desert, and no matter how many stars you have in that sky, it's going to be a finite number, because you will never exhaust the amount of finite numbers. That being the case, that infinity is not a large number. It cannot be reached. Anything that has been reached cannot be infinite. I have a question. The amount of moments in time, the amount of minutes, the amount of seconds, from the beginning of time until today, was it infinite or finite? Anybody? Finite. It has to be finite. The reason it can't be infinite is because if there was an infinite amount of time between the beginning of time or the beginning of history until today, we never would have reached today. You cannot finish, you cannot have already traversed an infinite amount of time. In other words, if let's say all the way from the beginning of history until now, somebody would be counting every moment of time. Let's say even you want to say, forget about right now for the fact that the world was created 6,000 years ago. Let's not think about that right now. Let's say even the world was always here. Time was always here. So no problem. Let it be always here. Question. You take somebody from the beginning of time that was always here, and every moment of time he's counting. 1, 2, 3, forever he was counting. The number that he would be up to today, would it be infinite or finite? Finite. It can't be infinite because there's an endless supply of finite numbers, and no matter how long he's counting, he never would have finished the amount of finite numbers. If he would be putting a jelly bean in a bowl for every minute that transpired throughout history, would the amount of jelly beans in the bowl be infinite or finite? See what I mean? It is not possible that the amount of time in the past could have been infinite. The amount of time in the past had to have been a finite amount of time, a finite amount of minutes, a finite amount of seconds. But being that it was finite, that means that it had to have a beginning. Time had to begin somewhere. Time, you say time always was here, but always is a finite amount of time. And because there was a finite amount of time, because time is finite, it had to have a beginning. And because it had to have a beginning, meaning it had to have a start, there's something that caused time to start. Because nothing can cause itself, nothing can create itself. Doesn't make any sense. So there was some entity, some cause, some reason, that something that caused time to begin. Now because it caused time to begin, it has to exist outside of time. Above time, without time, you cannot have space. So this thing that started time exists above time and exists above space. There's something out there that started time. Not bound to time, not bound to space. Some cause that caused the beginning of all of that. But Rabbi say that's just a warm-up. The real proof is coming. Everything in the world that happens has to have a reason. If I throw the dice and the dice lands on 10, there has to be a reason it landed on 10 as opposed to landing on 12. The reason it landed on 10, well, is a combination of many reasons. It has to do with the fact that the speed at which I threw the dice, the strength with which I threw it. It has to do with the texture and the hardness and the thickness of the table that the dice bounced on. It has to do maybe with the wind in the room. It has to do with a lot of things, but if you put all those reasons together and all those causes together, that's the reason why the dice landed on 12 as opposed to 10. And of course, if I reperform that entire process with the exact same circumstances that led the dice to land on 10 as opposed to 12, the exact same circumstances as if it was a videotape replay of what happened first, the dice will land on 10 again. Logic tells us that the same set of circumstances is going to result in the same effects. The same set of causes is going to result in the same effect. If you take the same exact clone, the two dimensions in reality, and the exact same thing is happening, and somebody throws the exact same dice in dimension number 1 as the one that throws the dice in dimension number 2, the dice under the exact same environment, exact same circumstances, no difference whatsoever, carbon copies, clones of each other, these two dimensions, these two worlds, the dice are going to land on the exact same number without a question. And if the dice land on a different number, that's because one of the causes, one of the reasons that existed in one of the set of circumstances that existed in the first scenario changed and exists. There's a different cause in the second scenario. Exact same set of causes results in the exact same set of effects. Exact same set of reasons has the exact same results. Everything has to have a reason. Everything has to have a reason because if it doesn't have a reason, then, well, if there are a few options that could happen, if the dice could land on a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, one die, so why should it land on 1 more than 2, or why should it land on 2 more than 3? It could have landed on any. There's a reason why it landed on 1 as opposed to 2. Again, if there's 2 options, so then we always need a reason why something ends up with option 1 as opposed to option 2. If there are no options, then you don't need a cause. If the dice, the dice have 6 on every side of them, both dice, and I throw the dice are going to land, the dice are going to give me a 12. And you can't ask what the reason is for the dice giving me a 12 because there were no other options. Yes, the question is, you may say, why were there number 6 on every side of both dice? It could have been, there was an option, it could have been 5, 4, 3, 2, or 1, and there's a reason why there's 6 as opposed to 5, 4, 3. The reason is I carved out a 6. However, and there's a reason why you can say, why did I throw 2 dice instead of 3? Because theoretically I could have thrown 3. There are many, many options over here, and whenever there are many options, many theoretical possibilities, theoretical scenarios, you need a reason why, of all the theoretical scenarios, one of those became a reality. But if both dice only have 6s on the side, you're not going to be able to ask me, well, okay, why did the dice land on 12 and not any other number? The answer is because those were the only options. And yes, you can then ask, well, why did the dice have 6 and not 5? That's true. But once the dice do have 6, you don't need a reason why it landed on 6, because there are no other options. Whenever there are options, something needs a reason. So, take this table. This table exists, and there has to be a reason why the table exists. Why does there have to be a reason? Because theoretically, this table could have not existed. Because the table exists, as opposed to not existing, the question is, why does it not exist? Why does the table exist as opposed to not existing? The answer is, because it has wood, it has legs, it has all of this. There's something that caused it to exist. Theoretically, it could have not been here. Theoretically, it could have, yes, been here. And there has to be some cause that determines, that decides that option 2, meaning existence, happens over option 1, which is non-existence. Everything in the world has a cause. If I throw a ball up, it falls down. There's a cause why it flew up in the air, and there's a cause why it got pulled down. The cause it threw up in the air was because I threw it at a certain speed, with a certain strength, a certain way, at a certain time. The reason it fell down was because of the force of gravity. Now, theoretically, it didn't have to fly up. Theoretically, when I threw the ball, it could have gone down. But the reason it went up and not down is because of the force of how I threw it. When it went up, theoretically, it could have stayed up. But there's a reason why it went down, and that's gravity. Whenever there's two theoretical possibilities, and one of those theoretical possibilities become reality, then you need a reason why theoretical possibility A did not happen, theoretical possibility B did happen. Now, of course, the cause that made the ball fall down, which is gravity, also has to have a cause. It has to have a reason. What's the reason there's gravity? We know gravity needs a reason because theoretically there could be gravity. Theoretically there could be no gravity. Theoretically there could be gravity. There needs to be a reason why there's gravity as opposed to not being gravity. And there has to be a reason why gravity is this strong as opposed to a bit stronger or a bit weaker, because theoretically any of this could have happened. If more than one thing could have happened, then there has to be a reason why the particular thing that did happen did. So not only does everything that happened has to have a reason, but the reasons also have to have reasons. And the reasons for the reasons have reasons as well. And yes, the reasons for the reasons for the reasons have their reasons. And their cause of the cause of the cause also has a cause. And because nothing can happen without a cause, there has to be a chain of causes going back in history that led eventually to everything we see in the world. The fact that that wall is yellow has to have a reason. The reason is because we painted it yellow. The reason we painted it yellow, the reason the paint was yellow as opposed to another color is because the chemicals in the paint. Why are the chemicals in the paint reflecting yellow light? Well, there's a specific reason for that. Why? Then there's a reason for the reason. And everything that happens in the world has a long chain of reasons that stretch back in history, a regression of reasons, a regression of causes. And that's a simple intuitive rule. Every effect has to have a cause. It's intuition. It's called the rule of causation. It's simple logic. But now I have a question. This chain of causes, this regression of causes that stretches back into the past, the amount of causes that led to this, all the circumstances we see today, all the causes that happened from now going back in time into the past, are they infinite or finite? If every time a cause happened, a new cause, somebody threw a jelly bean into a bowl, would the amount of jelly beans in the bowl today be infinite or finite? All in favor of infinite, show your hands. Very good. All in favor of finite, show your hands. Absolutely. The amount of causes had to be finite. Because you could not have already traversed, you could not have already had an infinite amount of causes. You cannot have an infinite amount of jelly beans in that bowl. If somebody would be counting the amount of causes, he could not have reached an infinite number, because there is an endless supply of finite numbers, and no matter how many causes there were, the number would still be finite. But what this means is that stretching all the way back in time, there's a cause. The first cause, if the cause is finite, that means there has to be a first one. It had to start somewhere, just like time started. There's a first time moment that had some kind of cause. There's a first cause all the way back in the chain, but that first cause didn't have any cause, because remember the chain of causes, the regression of causes, has to end somewhere, and it ends by that beginning cause, that first cause. Now this first cause, whatever it is, didn't have any cause. It exists, it has no reason for its existence, or it existed, but it had no reason for its existence. And how do we understand that? It doesn't make any sense. How could something exist and have no reason for its existence? It doesn't make any sense. We just said, if something happens, there has to be a reason it happened as opposed to not happening. So this first cause had to have a reason that it exists as opposed to not existing. On the other hand, it's impossible that there shouldn't be a cause that doesn't have a reason, a cause that doesn't have a cause, because if every cause would have a cause, the chain, the regression of causes going back would never end, and we know it has to end somewhere because it has to be finite. If it's finite, it had to have a beginning. So how do we understand this? How do we answer this contradiction? On one hand, we know there has to be a first cause that doesn't have a reason. On the other hand, we know that everything has to have a cause. The answer is that everything we know of has to have a cause. But remember we said that the reason everything has to have a cause is because theoretically it could have not existed. Theoretically some other scenario would have happened, and there has to be a reason why scenario B, meaning existence, happened over scenario A, which is non-existence. Yes, it's true, everything needs a cause, but there's a reason everything needs a cause. The reason everything needs a cause is because everything could have happened differently. When I throw a ball, it could have gone up. When I throw a ball, it could explode. When I throw a ball, it could disappear theoretically. When I throw a ball up, it could stay up. When I throw a ball, it could go down. When I throw a ball, it could blow up. And there's a reason why things happen the way they happen, as opposed to other ways that theoretically they could have happened. But let's say you have something that exists. A different type of existence than anything we've experienced. Everything that exists today, everything that ever existed, anything that we can imagine having existence, could also have not existed. And because it could also have not existed, there has to be a reason why existence, option 2, actually happened as opposed to option 1, existence, like the dice. It could have landed on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. But let's say there was a type of existence analogous to a set of dice where the number 6 is on every side. Something exists that could never have theoretically not existed. This chair didn't have to be here, it happens to be here. What made it be here? Therefore it needs a cause. This building didn't have to be here. Theoretically it could have been not here, but it's here. What caused it to be here? When something goes up, it could have theoretically stayed up. What causes it to come down as opposed to staying up? If something could have not existed, what causes it to exist? But what if there's something that could never have even theoretically not existed? Something where non-existence is not an option. Yes, it's beyond our comprehension, but what would happen if there would be such a thing, theoretically? The answer is such a thing would not need a cause. Because the only time something needs a cause to exist is when it theoretically could have not existed, so you need a cause to be machriya, to determine that it should exist as opposed to not exist, but if there's something that could never have not existed, that's like you have a die with the number 6 engraved on every side, so no matter how you throw it, you're not going to say, well, what's the cause it landed on 6? And therefore, we have no choice, logically, to answer our contradiction between fact A that must be true, namely that there has to be a first cause that doesn't have a reason for its existence, that nothing causes it to be what it is, nothing causes it to exist, versus fact number 2, which also has to be correct, also has to be true, that everything needs a cause. The answer is, everything only needs a cause if it theoretically could have not existed. But something that theoretically could never have not existed doesn't need a cause. And the first cause was that. Clearly, there's no way out of this. The first cause is what we call in Hebrew, mechuyev hametzius, or mukhrach hametzius. Something that could never have not been here. Yes, it's a different type of existence than we can imagine. It's a different type of existence that we could understand. And right now, I want to digress. And I want to explain that just because we cannot understand this, and we cannot comprehend this, doesn't mean that we have not successfully proven it. Because comprehending something and proving its truth are two completely different things. For example, somebody who's blind. Blind meaning he never saw light, he was born blind. You will never be able to explain to that blind person the difference between blue and red. Everybody knows that a blind person cannot understand the difference between light and darkness. He cannot understand what light is. Because if he never experienced it, he can't comprehend it, he can't comprehend it. However, even though he can't comprehend it or understand it, he can still prove that it's there. Light waves are provable. Light leaves footprints all over the scientific world that you could prove on paper that light exists. Not only can you prove that light exists, you can prove there's a difference mathematically between blue and red and green and yellow. And a blind man can prove that too. And a blind man can say to himself, there's such a thing as light. It bounces off things, it has different colors, it has a whole spectrum. He will have no idea what he's talking about, but he will be right. When I say he'll have no idea what he's talking about, it means he won't be able to picture what he's talking about. He won't be able to envision what he's talking about. He won't be able to comprehend what he's talking about. But he will know for a fact that he is right. The human brain doesn't create its own information. The human brain absorbs information, processes it, and spits it back in different forms. That's a big limitation to what the human brain can comprehend. It means we can only comprehend what we have experienced. A blind man can only comprehend what he experienced, and that does not include light, it does not include color. I'll give you another example. We were in school, our teachers told us, different teachers told us different things. Teacher would tell us, we would ask her, where does space end? And the teacher would say, space never ends. And we would raise our hand and we'd ask the teacher, what do you mean space never ends? Doesn't make any sense. How could it never end? Everything ends somewhere. And the teacher would say, well, we can't comprehend infinity, but space is infinite. Okay. Another teacher would say something even worse. Space ends. Raise our hands, say, teacher, what do you mean space ends? How could it end? What happens afterwards? What can exist without space? And teacher will say, well, we can't comprehend it, but space ends. Now, mathematically, one of the two things are true, either space ends or space doesn't end. Either way, we can't comprehend it, because we never experienced infinity, and we never experienced a spaceless environment. But one of those two things have to be true. Again, you see that just because you can't comprehend something doesn't mean you can't prove it. Now, reality is space does end, because as we said, you cannot have an infinite amount of something. So space has to end somewhere, because no matter how far out it goes, the amount of miles in space is always going to be finite. So the first cause, the Siba Rishona, is what we call Mukhrach HaMetzius. We cannot comprehend that. Because we are only used to existence that theoretically could have not been here. Everything theoretically could have not been here. This happens to exist. The chair, the table, the doors, the ceiling, the whole building, the whole world only happens to exist. And if it happens to exist, happens happens requires a reason or a cause. But if something doesn't happen to exist, but something exists because intrinsically it had to exist, it could never have not existed, then such a thing does not need a cause. And it's mukhrach, it has to be that the first cause is such an entity. What else do we know about this first cause? We know that the first cause, number one, is above time and space. We know that the first cause could never have not been here. We know that the first cause has no reasons and no causes. Well, this leads us to conclude many other things about this first cause. Number one, if it's above time and space, it can never change. Because in order to change, you need a before and you need an after. Without before and after, without time, you can't have before and after. So the first cause can never change. If it can never change, it can never die. If it can never die, it can never disappear. You can never, if today you're living, if today you exist, and then later you don't exist, that's a change. And you can't have a change without time. And if you're above time, you can't change. So this first cause is above time and space, can never change, can never die, can never disappear. The first cause also has no reasons for it to exist. Now let's think about what that means. What is the reason why I exist, and not only exist, what is the reason why I am what I am? When I ask what's the reason why I am, what I mean is what makes me me. The reason why I am what I am is because I have eyes, I have nose, I have a mouth, I have a body. All the things that make me me, that's the cause of my existence. When I say cause of my existence, it doesn't only mean what caused me to be born. It means what caused me to be me. All the things that get together to comprise me, that's my cause. Everything in the world has several things, at least two, I guess, that have many things that get together to comprise what they are. There's shape, there's form, there's substance. There's at the very least, chomer and surah, there's form and substance for everything in the world. There's texture, there's something. There theoretically could be, let's say, substance without form, but whatever characteristics that substance without form has or may have, if such a thing exists, that's the cause of its existence. Its characteristics are its cause. If it wouldn't have these characteristics, it wouldn't have this cause. If it wouldn't be put together with these characteristics, it wouldn't be what it is. So it's being put together by all these elements or components of its existence, that's its cause. Being that the first cause, has no reason for its existence, it cannot have any of these components. It cannot have an eyes, a nose, or mouth, because if it would, then the combination of these things are its cause. And you could say, well, what caused the eyes and nose and mouth to get together? This first cause can never have any characteristics or can never have any attributes that would allow you to ask, okay, what put these things together? What's the reason they're together? Why are they this way as opposed to another way? Why does he have these attributes, the first cause, as opposed to other attributes? Once you attribute to the first cause different characteristics, now you're attributing a cause. You're taking him away from the category of having no reason. Because once you establish something and say, well, why is it this way if it could have been that way? How did it get these characteristics? Why does it have these characteristics? These characteristics are what caused it. It has no cause, it has no length, it has no width, it has no height, it can't be a physical thing. Not only cannot be a physical thing, it can't have any boundaries or parameters or defining limitations. In other words, let's take something that's not physical. Communism. Communism is different than, let's say, socialism. Why? Well, because there is a limitation to what we consider communism, and what that does is it makes sure that the definition of communism does not encroach on socialism. That makes them different. And that's the cause of what makes communism communism, is its definition, its parameters. In Lashon HaKodesh, the word for definition, and the word for limitation is the same thing, geder. In English also, definition. Something is defined, meaning something is explained in a certain way, but something is defined by what creates its boundaries, its limitations. If the first cause doesn't have any reasons or doesn't have any cause, means it can't have any definitions, meaning it's no boundaries. If it has no boundaries, it cannot have a description. It cannot have any attributes, any accidental attributes, any characteristics, anything that's incidental to it. Because if it would, this would be its cause. Therefore, the first cause can't be physical. It can't, well, besides which anything physical has to be within time and space. It cannot be physical, it cannot have any attributes. It can't be made up of different things, because if it would, that would be a reason for it being what it is. In Lashon HaKodesh, this is called kuloi poshut. The first cause is kuloi poshut. It has no characteristics. This means that, let's say, by me, I have a lot of characteristics. I have arms, I have legs, I have a memory, I have creativity, thought process, I have a thinking process. All of these things are different, and they get together at these different building blocks of what I am, and that's what makes me me. The first cause that has no reason for what it is cannot have any of these building blocks. It is all one gestalt, it's all one kuloi poshet, without any boundaries, without any definitions, without any way to distinguish between where it is and where it is not, what it is and what it is not. Well, you could say there's no scope in terms of a way to describe it. There's no scope in terms of it having certain characteristics, because those characteristics would be its cause. Can the first cause, can there be more than one of them? Can there be more than one first cause? The answer is no, there can't. First of all, two things can't be a first cause. But the question is, can there be two of these entities that are mukhrach hametzius, that are kuloi poshuts that we're describing? The answer is no, there can't. Because in order for something to be plural, in order for plurality to exist, in order for something to be quantifiable, it has to have boundaries. Without boundaries, you can't have quantity. Why is that? Well, if we have 4 chairs over there, at this table there's 4 chairs. Why is chair number 1 not chair number 2? Why are they 2 different things and not one? Well, the answer is they take up different space, they have different backs, they have different legs. Because the definition and the boundaries of one do not encroach on the boundaries and definitions of number 2, they remain separate. Therefore, they're 2 different things. Why is communism and socialism 2 different things? Because they're described differently. They have a different definition. They have different boundaries. They have different gedorim. Why are the Sfarim in this room not one sefer? Why are they different? The reason why they are plural, that there's a multiplicity of them, that there are many of these Sfarim, is because the space one takes up, and what makes one one is not what makes the other one the other one. But if, let's say, there would be something without any boundaries, without any definitions to say that, okay, it doesn't encroach in the next one, then there can't be more than one of those. The world that such a thing lives in, so to speak, is not something that you could have another one of, because the question will be, if there are 2 of them, what makes one not two and what makes two not one? What separates them? In order to separate two things, there has to be a definition for both of them that limits them to what they are as opposed to being the other thing as well. A chair has the space it takes up, and what it is not the other one. Any concept you want, the reason why there's two things, name any two things in the world, an apple and an orange. Why are the apple and the orange two different things? Because the borders, the limitations of the apple, the shape of the apple, the limitations of the apple are different than the limitations of the orange. But if you have something that doesn't have limitations, you can't have two. You can't even quantify it. It's not that there has to be one and you can't have two, like you can't have two first place winners in a race. You also can't have two of those. It's not for the same reason. The reason you can't have two is because you can only have one, and by definition there's one and not two. Over here, it's not that you can only have one because it's the first and you can't have a second. That's true regarding Sibari, regarding its being a first cause, but being Kuloi Poshut and Mukhra Chametzias, you can't have two. The reason is not because one is first and you can't have a second, but rather because a Mukhra Chametzias that has no borders cannot be quantified. It's not possible quantity. Quantity only exists when there's limitation, borders, and definitions between the different units. If something doesn't have definitions, it cannot be a unit. If it can't be a unit, it can't even be quantified. So we know that this first cause, this Mukhra Chametzias, this thing that's above time and space, cannot be quantified, and therefore there can only be one of them. Next thing we know, can this first cause be mechanical, be unthinking, or does it have to be sentient? Does it have to be aware? Or is it unaware? Is it just a mechanical, robotic cause? The answer is it cannot be unaware. It cannot be mechanical. It has to be sentient and it has to be able to choose. The reason is because this first cause caused everything else. Or it caused the next cause that created the domino effect that created everything else. When the first cause created this, it was either one of two ways. Either by choice or not by choice. Not by choice meaning it had no choice and it had to create everything else. It had to. It either had a choice or had no choice. If it had a choice, it's sentient. If it had no choice and it had to, the question is what made it have to? What could have impacted on this first cause that made it, that forced it to create everything else? If it wasn't a choice, then it was forced. If it wasn't a choice, then it had to do it. If it had to do it, what you're saying is that something impacted on it and something made it do it. And then it's not the first cause anymore. So if that option is out, the only other option is that it had to do it by choice. In order for this first cause to retain the title first cause, in order for it to be a first cause, and nothing impacted on it, nothing made it happen, it was there alone without anything else once upon a time. It was the cause of all causes. In order to create whatever it created, in order to cause whatever it caused, had to have been by total and complete choice. Nothing could have made it do that. Nothing could have made it create anything. Because then something impacted it. And that caused it to do what it did, and that's a contradiction to it being the first cause. So what we know about this first cause, we know that there exists a first cause. We know that there is only one and not two. We know it's above time and space. We know that it is the cause of everything. We know that it's a thinking, a sentient entity and it's not mechanical. We know it can't be physical. We know it's what we call kulei poshut. It has no characteristics. It's a very interesting thing out there. What are we going to name it? Any ideas? The Jewish people have a name for this first cause. We call it Hashem. We worship the first cause. We worship the Mukhrach HaMetzias, the Mechuyev HaMetzias. We worship the cause of causes, the creator of everything. We don't need anybody to tell us that the first cause exists. We don't need anybody to tell us that a Mukhrach HaMetzias exists. We don't need anybody to tell us any of this. It's all poshut, it's all proven, it's all simple reason. The chiddush is that this first cause, that's our God. Some people worship sticks, some people worship stones, some people worship trees, and some people worship mountains, some people worship statues. We worship the first cause. There's no question that tree exists. The question is it God? There's no question the mountain exists. The question is it God? And there's no question that the first cause, the Mukhrach HaMetzias, exists. If you want, you can call a tree God, and they can worship it, and that'll be your God. So you'll ask a tree worshiper, how do you know God exists? You'll say, look at it, there it is. That's my God. If you ask a Jew, how do you know your God exists? He'll say, what do you mean? Look at it, it's the first cause, it has to be there. Mukhrach HaMetzias. There's a first cause that caused everything, that's a sentient entity, that's above time and space, that's our God. And that, by the way, is how the Ran, that great sage the Ran, learns the mitzvah of emunah. The Ran in Droshes Haran says that the reason why the mitzvah to believe in God was stated in an unusual manner, instead of stating, thou shalt believe in me, the Torah says, Anoichi Hashem loikecha, which is a statement of fact, as opposed to a command, is because the mitzvah of Anoichi Hashem loikecha is not to believe that there's a creator, and not to believe there's a Mukhrach HaMetzias, not to believe that there's a first cause, because that we know without that. The mitzvah of Anoich Hashem Leikecha is to have emunah that the first cause, the creator that we know exists, that is our leader. That's our God, meaning that's the one that took us out of Egypt. That's the one that gave us the mitzvahs on Har Sinai. That's emunah. Emunah doesn't mean to believe that there's a creator, that there's a first cause. Emunah doesn't mean that we should believe all these things that we know are there, exist in the first cause, because that's the same way there's no emunah to believe. It doesn't make sense to say there's emunah to believe there's a mountain or a tree. What do you mean emunah? There's a mountain and a tree. Take a look, it's there. So too, there's no emunah to believe that there's a first cause and there's a creator of the world, but rather, the emunah is to believe that this first cause is the one that's been leading us throughout the generations, the one that gave us the Torah and Har Sinai. And therefore, he says, Anoichi Hashem Eloikecha, the mitzvah says, the Torah says, I am Hashem your God. The word Hashem, Yud-Kei Vov-Kei, you know what Yud-Kei Vov-Kei means? Hashem Hanechbar Hazeh, I'm reading from the Ran. Hashem Hanechbar Hazeh mi'arba oisius, the name Yud-Kei Vov-Kei, hu moira al ila mechuyeves hametzias. It's referring to the first cause, the mechuyev hametzias, the entity that could never have not been here. V'zeloi bol tzad ha-mitzvah. This is not part of the mitzvah, the fact that there's a Yud-Kei Vov-Kei. Aval al tzad ha-davar ha-poshet shahoyu moidim boi kvar. But that's just a reference to a fact that everybody knew about. The same way they knew that there are mountains and trees, they knew that there was a Mukhrach HaMetzias, a first cause. Nobody had any doubt that there's a Mechuyev HaMetzias. We just reasoned it. It's Poshet, there has to be. There can't be an infinite regression of causes. It had to have started somewhere. And once it started somewhere, we know a lot about the place it started, with the first cause. What Hashem told them now, what he was machadish to them now, what he told them now that's new to them, the mitzvah that he gave them, that they should believe in him, is he's speaking as if he's talking about himself, and Hashem says, Anoichi Hashem loikecha, meaning, you know that there's a Mechuyev HaMetzias. You know that there's a first cause. Ani hu oisoi Mechuyev HaMetzias manigecha. I am that Mechuyev HaMetzias, the one you know exists. I am the one that leads you. I am your manhig. V'hu perish eloikecha. And that's what it means, Asher say, Sichom Yeretz Mitzrayim, that took you out of Egypt. V'hinei shoyush ha-mitzvah hazoi, says the Ran, shenamin shemei oisoi asher nachnu kvar yoidim shu Mechuyev HaMetzias. That which we know, we already knew is a Mechuyev HaMetzias. She'aseichel ha-metuye bod machriach zeh v'ef shalach loikolov b'shum ponim. Again. She'aseichel ha-metuye bod machriach zeh. A person's logic, a person's common sense demands that there's a first cause, that there's a Mechuyev HaMetzias. V'ef shalach loikolov b'shum ponim. And it's not possible to disagree with such a thing. Mimenu magia, from him comes our mitzvahs. He took us out of Egypt. Ani Hashem Elokecha, Ani Hashem, I am Yud Kei Vav Kei, the Mechuyev HaMetzias. Elokecha, I am the one who leads you. Elokecha means your manhig. Asher hoitzei sicha mi'eretz Mitzrayim, and that's Emun. Emun isn't to believe that a Mechuyev HaMetzias exists. Emun is to believe that Mechuyev HaMetzias, that created the world, is the one that led us throughout the generations and continues to lead us till today. So when we talk about proving God, and somebody's going to ask you, well, how could you prove that God exists if you don't even understand what God is? The answer is the question's a mistake, because yes, it's true. If I want to prove this table exists, so I can't prove the table exists if I set out to prove it until I know what a table is. If I set out to prove that George Washington existed, I can't set out to prove it until I define what George Washington, who he was. And I would not be able to say, well, I'm proving that God exists unless I first set out to understand what God is. But that's not what we're doing. What we're doing is, we're not proving God exists in that sense. What we're doing is, we're proving that there's a Mukhrach HaMetzias, that there's a Siba Rishoina. We're proving the characteristics of that Siba Rishoina, of that first cause, of that sentient being that created everything. And then we're giving it a name. Yud Kei Vav Kei. Hashem. That's its name. You can call it whatever you want. But that's its name. It's not that we're proving a new entity called Hashem. We're taking an entity that's just as obvious as the mountain and the tree, and we're saying that is our God. And therefore, you take a look, I'll show you, it's a very, very meduyik in the Rambam. The Rambam, in 3 places that we're going to talk about tonight, mentions the mitzvah to believe in God. But he does it differently, in 2 different ways. In Sefer HaMitzvahs, the Rambam says, mitzvah, tzivu yashet tzivanu behamonos ha'aloikus. We're obligated to believe in God. What does it mean we're obligated to believe in God? Hushenamin sheisham olav asibo. We have to believe there's a first cause. Hu poil kolan imtsoyim. And the mitzvah is from the pasuk Anoichi Hashem Elokecha. First he says, there's a mitzvah to believe in God, mitzvah to believe in Elokus. Then he says what the mitzvah is. Fine. In the Yud Gimel Ikrim, in the Pirush HaMishnais and Sanhedrin, the Rambam does it the same way. The Rambam says, HaYisoid HaRishayin Lahamin Metzius HaBoirei Yizbarach Shmai. Mitzvah to believe in God. For who? What's God? Sheyesham Nimtza Sholem B'chol Darkei HaMetzius U'ilas HaMetzius Kula, etc. First he says there's a mitzvah to believe in God, and then he explains what God is. However, the Rambam in Mishnah Torah does it differently. The Rambam there doesn't say there's a mitzvah to believe in God and then explain what God is. He does the opposite. Yisoid ha-yisoidus v'yomen ha-chochmas leida sheisha motzu rishon. There's a mitzvah, the most important thing in the world is to believe that there is a first being. V'hu mamsi kol nimtza, he's the cause of everything, he's the, without him there would be no world, he's the only emes in the world, ein oid milavadai, and then, in Halacha Hey, the Rambam says, "Hamotzu hazehu Eloikei ha'olam adoin kol ha'oretz." That entity is God. So why did the Rambam in the Yud Gimel Ikra, in Pirush HaMishnayos, and in Sefer HaMitzvahs explain it by saying first there's a mitzvah to believe in God, and then what God is, as opposed to in Mishnah Torah where the Rambam said that Yisoid HaYisoidis V'Yomen HaChochmas, he could have said is to believe in God. And this is what God is. He didn't say that. He says there's a mitzvah to believe, and then he gave all the characteristics of God, and then he said, and that's God. Just as incidentally, the Ramchal does it the same way as in Mishnah Torah. The Ramchal at the beginning of Derech Hashem says, Kol Ishmi Yisrael tzorach sheyamin v'yeda, everybody has to believe and know, sheisha motzui rishon kadmoin v'nitzchi, shehimtzi umamtzi kol ma shenimtza b'metzias, there's a mitzvah, everybody has to know all these things about the first cause, and that's God. Why sometimes do they say there's a mitzvah to believe in God and then explain God? Other times they say there's a mitzvah to believe in all of these characteristics and then it says you should know that's God. The answer is because there are two parts to the mitzvah of Emunah. There's a mitzvah lahamin v'leida, like the Ramchal says, Kol Yishmi Yisrael tzorach lahamin v'leida, Emunah and Yediyah. You have to believe and you have to know. Belief means that you have to believe it. You have to choose that you're going to accept this. Yediyah, we all know, is more than Emunah. Yediyah is, you know something for a fact and you don't have to believe it. Yediyah, when we talk about proofs of God, when we talk about a sensory perception of God, we're talking about Yediyah. When we're talking about belief in God, just accepting it without the proofs, that's Emunah. Therefore, the process of Emunah and the process of Yediyah are two different things. The process of Yediyah is, like we said, first there is we have to point to the Siba Rishona, the Mukhrach HaMetzias, all those characteristics we know, and then we say, we call that's our God. The same way somebody of Ovid Avodah Zarah takes a look at a mountain and says, that mountain is my God. Jews take a look at the mitzvah, the Siba Rishona, and say that's God. That's Yediyah. When the Rambam talks about Yediyah, Yisoid ha-Yisoidish v'shoyrish ha-Chochmas leida, he first points to that Mukhrach HaMetzias, that Siba of all Sibas everybody knows exist, and then he says, you should know, we call that God, that's our God. The Ramchal, Kol Ishmi Yisrael tzorach sheyamin v'yeda, once you say Yeda, he points to the Mukhrach HaMetzias and says, we call that God. But the two places where the Rambam says Lahamin, to believe, where we're not doing the proof, we're not first pointing to the entity that we know exists and naming that God, but rather we say there's a mitzvah to believe in God. Now, you can say, what are the requirements of the mitzvah? In those places, when we say Emunah, we say there's God first, we say mitzvah to believe in God, and then we describe what God is. So, it doesn't make sense to ask a kasha, well, how could you prove God if you don't know what God is? The answer is, we're not proving God, we're just saying that, we're just naming that Mukhrach HaMetzias we know exists, that Bria, that Borei Olam we know exists, we're naming him God. So far, let's recap in a nutshell what we have. We've established that the world was created by a first cause. It could not have been here forever, it had a beginning, and the beginning is we call the Siba Rishona. We know a few things about the Siba Rishona. We had a question. We said, how could it be that something has no cause if everything needs a cause? We said the answer is that this first cause is different than everything else. This first cause is what we call a Mukhrach HaMetzias. This first cause could not have ever not existed. And because it could never have not existed, it doesn't need a reason to bring it into existence. It doesn't even need a reason why it exists. Now, because this is a first cause, we also know that this first cause can't be physical. Because if the first cause was physical, if it had eyes or nose or mouth or any type of physical characteristics, length, height, width, depth, those physical characteristics would be its cause. The reason why it would be what it is because of those characteristics. See, a cause is something that if you remove it, the entity disappears. A cause is something that if it wasn't for that thing, you wouldn't be here. This table, the cause for this table is its length, its height, its breadth, its form, its substance. Without any of those things, without all those things, the table would disappear. The first cause has to be something that has no characteristics without which it would not be there. There is nothing that the first cause can have that makes, that because of those things, the first cause exists. If it would, then it wouldn't be a first cause. Those things would be its cause. Anything physical has physical parameters, and those parameters are the cause of its existence, because without those things it would not exist. And even something not physical. Even if something is not physical, as long as it has definitions, parameters, boundaries, it's defined some way, such that that definition, those boundaries make it what it is, such that without those boundaries the thing would not exist, the thing would not be here, then those boundaries, those definitions are its cause. Let's take, for example, use again, let's say there's some non-physical entity. I don't know, some non-physical waves, just spiritual kind of things. But if these spiritual kind of things have a definition, some type of defining characteristics without which the thing wouldn't be here, the thing wouldn't be what it is. Without those characteristics, without those borders, then the thing has a cause. And whether it's physical or spiritual, if it has definitions, borders, boundaries, characteristics, if it's made up of many different things, if it's made up of any different things, those things that it's made up of, those things that define it, those things that measure it, those things that comprise its borders and its scope, that's its cause. And therefore the first cause can't have any of those. Certainly can't be physical, because anything physical has all those characteristics that are its cause. But even something spiritual, which has which is defined, which has boundaries, which has describable characteristics, which has, let's say, many components, such that you can say, well, it's made up of eyes, nose, and a mouth. If it's made up of eyes, nose, and a mouth, then the combination of eyes, nose, and a mouth becomes its cause. So the first cause, not only could it not be physical, but it can't be anything that is defined. It can't be anything that has any characteristics. It can't be anything that has any boundaries. It can't be anything that has any way to say that, okay, until here, this is the scope. It has no scope. This is the scope of this entity, beyond which, outside of which, without which, this entity is not here, or this is beyond the entity. Because that scope would be its cause, the cause for its being. And the first cause cannot have any cause. So besides being mukhrach hametzius, or mechuyev hametzius, something that has to be here, something that could never have not been here, we also know about the first cause that it's kuloi poshut. It has no characteristics. It certainly can't be physical, but not only can it be not physical, it can also not be spiritual if this spiritual entity has characteristics or has definition, be it in a physical way or a non-physical way. Any type of components this first cause cannot have, because otherwise that would be its cause. So we know two things about this first cause. Number one, it's mechuyev hametzius, mukhrach hametzius, and two, it's kuloi poshut. And at this point, we're able to understand the statement in the Rambam. There's a famous Rambam. The Rambam discusses the contradiction between Yediyah and Bechira, between the fact that Hashem gives us free will to choose against, versus the fact that Hashem knows what we're going to choose. And one would think that if the future is already known by someone, meaning Hashem, that means the future is fixed and it cannot change. If it cannot change, so then our choice is already predetermined, and it's not free will. The Rambam says that this question can't really be asked because God's knowledge is not really the same as a human being's knowledge. A human being and his knowledge are two different things, whereas God and his knowledge are one and the same. Being that it's one and the same, you can't compare God's knowledge to human knowledge, and therefore the question can't be asked. And others ask on the Rambam that if the Rambam says, and the Rambam says that this is something we can't understand, if this is something we can't understand, so what exactly is the message the Rambam is telling us? Well, based on what we said, we can understand exactly what the Rambam means. When we say Hashem is Kulei Poshet, what that means is that whereas, let's say, I have a memory, I have vision, I have creativity, I have strength, I have weaknesses, I have knowledge, I have all sorts of different things, eyes, nose, and mouth, but even not physical things, my knowledge, my creativity, my memory, things like that. Each one is a component in and of itself, and it's something that belongs to me. And these components get together and they make me what I am. Without them, I'd be a little different. Maybe I'd still be me without my memory, but my memory is something that gets together with everything else, and that makes me me. Hashem, on the other hand, doesn't have any characteristics, which means Hashem cannot have all these different components. When we say Hashem is strong, we don't mean that Hashem has strength. We mean that Hashem can do things even without strength. Hashem doesn't need strength. When we say that Hashem is knowledgeable, He's aware, it doesn't mean that Hashem has knowledge, because knowledge would be a component, and remember the Siba Rishona, which is Hashem's Kulei Poshet. Hashem does not have any knowledge. What we call knowledge is not part of Hashem, just like Hashem has no nose, because a nose is a characteristic, a nose is an incidental attribute. A knowledge is also an incidental attribute, and Hashem has none of those. Hashem doesn't need knowledge. He's not ignorant even without knowledge. He's not weak even without strength. Hashem doesn't need any of the powers that we have. Hashem doesn't need any of the characteristics that we have in order to make a Kriyas Yamsuf, in order to be aware of the future, in order to do whatever He does. Whatever effects Hashem has on this world, where it seems that it's the result of strength, or it's the result of knowledge, or it's the result of whatever, it's not really the result of strength or knowledge or any components, because Hashem doesn't have any of that. Hashem is one entity, Kulei Poshet, one gestalt, and it's something not only that is not divisible into parts, it not only it's not divisible into fractions, it's not like, you can't divide Hashem into two halves or 4 quarters or anything like that. But not only that, Hashem has no characteristics altogether. Not only is He indivisible, He has no characteristics. It's Kulei Poshet. And therefore Hashem has no knowledge. He doesn't need knowledge. He's not ignorant, but it's not knowledge that He has. And so what the Rambam is saying is that whereas by a human being, if a human being knows of the future, that means the future is fixed. But that shows that knowledge, foreknowledge of the future fixes the future. But God has no foreknowledge of the future. He's not ignorant of the future. But the mechanism by which Hashem knows the future, or the mechanism by which Hashem is not ignorant of the future, it's a better way of saying it, is not knowledge. So it's no proof. Just because we know that foreknowledge of the future, if somebody has knowledge of what's going to be, that predetermines the future, it doesn't prove that Hashem's non-ignorance also predetermines the future. We only know about the effects of knowledge of the future. We don't know the effects of Hashem on the future. Now, we don't mean to say that the Rambam doesn't mean to say that, well, we don't know how Hashem knows the future. It's not what he means. If I say, I don't know how so-and-so knows the future, I mean, so-and-so maybe has a crystal ball, so-and-so maybe figured out what will be based on some mathematical equation, so-and-so may have found, in some science fiction type of way, next week's newspaper. And you can say, well, I don't know what the method is that Hashem knows the future. That's not what we're saying. We're not saying that, the Rambam's not saying that we don't know the method by which Hashem knows the future. We're not saying that we don't know the method the way by which Hashem obtains knowledge of the future. We're saying that it's not knowledge at all of the future that Hashem has. Because Hashem is kulei poshet. He has no strength, he has no knowledge, he has none of all of these are human attributes. Just like he has no nose, he has no strength. When we say Hashem is a gibor, we mean that Hashem doesn't need gevura. Hashem is not weak. Hashem doesn't need strength in order to do what he does. We mean also, another way of explaining it is that we mean that the effect of what Hashem has on the world, a kriyas yamsuf, an earthquake, makis against Paroi, the effect of what Hashem has feels like it's gevura. But Hashem really doesn't have what we know as strength. Hashem doesn't have any components. And therefore the Rambam is saying that Hashem and his knowledge is one. What he means by that is Hashem is kulei poshut, and therefore it's not knowledge at all. It's to say that Hashem can tell the future because of his knowledge is the same as saying that Hashem has a nose and he can smell something. Hashem cannot smell, he has no nose, and Hashem has no knowledge, and the way Hashem can tell the future has nothing to do with knowledge. That's kulei poshut. And at this point, we're going to answer some common questions that people who don't understand these things commonly ask. And maybe they don't want to understand these things, or maybe they just don't understand. And we already have the tools to be able to answer these questions. Question number one. The whole world needs a creator. Nothing can exist without a creator. So there has to be a Hashem, right? Question. What do we gain by saying that the world needs a creator, therefore it had to have a Hashem? If everything needs a creator, nothing can come without a creator. Who created Hashem? Big professors have this question. And big professors use it to say that, the proof of all proofs to God are null and void because of this. But what's the answer? More than what's the answer? Why is the question a mistake? Why is the question an error to begin with? The reason why the question is an error is because the reason something needs a creator does not apply to the first cause. The reason something needs a creator is because without a creator, without a cause for its existence, why does it exist? Why doesn't it not exist? Anything could theoretically not exist. Anything with characteristics, anything that has a reason why it exists, that reason didn't have to be here. Anything that theoretically could exist and theoretically could not exist needs a reason why option A, existence, happen to have panned out more than option B, which is non-existence. If the dice have different numbers on each side, there has to be a reason why it fell, or why it landed on number 1 as opposed to number 2. But the Siba Rishona, the first cause, is a mechuyev hametzias, is a mukhrach hametzias. There's no such thing that really the first cause could have not existed and it happens to exist. If it's true that it could have not existed, then it's not the first cause, and indeed it needs a cause, and then keep going back in time until you get to the first cause, right? An infinite regression of causes is impossible, so there has to be a first cause. But once you get to that first cause, Bal Korchoch, we have proven that that first cause has to be a mechuyev hametzias, that it could never have not been here. It's like the dice where the number 6 is on every side, and you asked me, well, what's the cause that it landed on 6? Well, nothing else was an option. So if something is physical, or if something is even spiritual, but it has parameters, a cause to its existence, if it has a reason why it exists, if theoretically it could have not existed, and it could have theoretically not existed because these parameters, this scope could just not have been here. The table is a physical thing. The table theoretically could have not been here. Communism theoretically could never have existed. Anything that we know of, anything that has parameters, everything except the Siba Rishona, everything except the first cause, which has to be one, as we established, everything except the first cause has parameters, and therefore theoretically could have existed and theoretically could have not existed. So why, of the two options, did option of existence happen? But if you're mukhrach hametzias, if you're mechuyev hametzias, then then you don't need a cause. Because you only need a cause if theoretically you could have not existed. But if there is no option of non-existence, the mukhrach hametzias, which is kulei poshut, which is unquantifiable, then you don't need a cause. And this question is addressed by the Chazon Ish in the Sefer Emunah B'Tochen, which you could find at the end of the Chazon Ish in Taharis. Now, in the small Sefer Emunah B'Tochen that they printed, this happened to have been left out, but you could find this piece in the Chazon Ish in Taharis. The Chazon Ish discusses the difference between Dimyan and Seichel. Dimyan, he says, is the way things seem to a person without thinking it through. The way things seem at first glance, when a person's mind shoots from the hip, the way things seem, that's Dimyan. Seichel is when a person thinks things through and sees things the way they really are. He asks this question, and he says that there are people that ask, what do you gain by stating and proving that everything needs a creator? Who created the creator? And the Chazon Ish says that this question is a question asked by Bali Dimyan. People that don't think things through. People that just shoot from the hip. And he says that Ein l'dimyon bina is his lashon. That this dimyon, this non-thought out question, is not asked with bina, is not asked with intelligence, is not asked with iyun, is not asked with analysis. Ki kol nimtza sheyesh lo mida, oirech v'roiche v'shetach. Anything that has measurements. It's possible that this thing could have not existed. Anything of this type that theoretically could have not existed, there had to have been a time that it came into existence, because it could never have existed forever, for an infinite amount of time. And therefore they had to have had a beginning. Anything that had a beginning had something that caused it to begin. Anything that has a beginning, a creation, had a cause that caused the beginning. There are certain things that exist without the option of non-existence. Like the fact that 2 plus 2 equals 4. Who created the fact that 2 plus 2 is 4? It didn't need a creator. 2 plus 2 is 4 is just a fact, and the reason it doesn't need a creator is because it never had a beginning. It never had a beginning because there's no option of non-existence. There's no option of falsification of 2 plus 2 is 4. It's just a fact. And the Chazon Ish is giving a mashal. Of course, 2 plus 2 equals 4 is not a thing. It's just a fact. But the Chazon Ish is giving a mashal of what is a, we could call a mechuyev hametzias, something that has no option of not being here. And the Siba Rishona has no option of not being here, and therefore it doesn't need a creator. Everything needs a creator, it needs a cause, because it had to have a beginning. It had to have a beginning because it could not have been here for an infinite amount of time. But the Siba Rishona is a mechuyev hametzias, and therefore it does not need a first cause. It does not need a cause. It is the first cause. The next question that we'll answer, which is related to this question, is granted the world needed a creator, but who says that creator is Hashem? Maybe the world was created by a demon. Maybe the world was created by a malach. Maybe the world was created by a spaghetti monster. What's the answer to that? Same answer. The answer is that whoever created the world, or whatever created the world, that's our God, period. Whatever created the world, that's our God. And I don't mean earth. Whatever created the universe, whatever created a komash and nimtza b'metzias, whatever created everything in reality, that's our God. Now you're going to ask me, is it possible that a demon, a spaghetti monster, something could have created everything in the world? No, it couldn't have, because who created the spaghetti monster? The demon also needs a creator. And the creator needs a creator all the way back to a Siba Rishona. The entity that created everything had to have been a first cause, had to have been kuloi poshut, had to have been mukhrach hametzias. And that entity, that Siba Rishona, is what we refer to as Hashem. That's our God. Couldn't have been anything else except what we know our God to be. And remember the way the Rambam discusses the mitzvah of emunah. It's not that, okay, we have a God and we're going to prove now that our God happened to have created the world. It's the opposite. We're going to prove that the world was created by a Siba Rishona, a mechuyev hametzias, a kuloi poshut, something that, an entity that's l'mayla min hamakom u'min hazman, above time and space, and we're going to worship that entity. That's our God, the Siba Rishona. You know, in the Sefer Maisa Ish, there's a story where somebody asked the Chazon Ish, what's emunah? And the Chazon Ish said, what's emunah? He said, how much is 1 plus 1? And the guy said 2. So the Chazon Ish said, are you sure? And the guy says, yeah. He says, are you 100% sure? And he said, yeah. Is it even slightly possible 1 plus 1 could not equal 2? He said, no. Was there ever a time that 1 plus 1 was not 2? He said, no. Chazon Ish said, that's emunah. Now, when you read the story, you may think that the person asked the Chazon Ish, he meant to ask the Chazon Ish, how much do you have to believe? Do you have to be 100% sure in your emunah, or is 99.9% enough? And the Chazon Ish said, just like you're 100% sure if 1 plus 1 is 2, so too you have to be sure that HaKadosh Baruch Hu exists. However, it's clear from this little piece in the Emunah B'Tachon that the Chazon Ish meant a lot more in that story, because the exact same language that he used in that story about 1 plus 1 being 2, and that the fact that 1 plus 1 equals 2 never had a beginning, is exactly what he's explaining here in Emunah B'Tachon. And what that person meant to ask the Chazon Ish was not how sure do I have to be of my belief, but what exactly is it that I have to believe about Hashem? And the Chazon Ish is answering as a mashal of what you have to believe about Hashem. You have to believe about Hashem that Hashem has no cause, just like the fact that 1 + 1 = 2 has no cause. That Hashem has no beginning, just like, and how do we understand that? We understand that the same way 1 + 1 = 2 never began. There are certain things that have no option of non-existence, no option of falsification. And Hashem has those characteristics also. Hashem is a nimshal. It's not a comparison to the fact of 1 + 1 = 2. It's not an entity, it's a fact. It's a moshel. It's an analogy, not a comparison. We know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is a mechuyev hametzius, has no haschala, and that's what Amunah is. Now, the things that we've established about Hashem, the things that we've reasoned about Hashem, these things are actually all part of the obligation that people have, the Torah obligation people have to believe about Hashem. If you take a look at the Ramchal at the beginning of the Derech Hashem, he lists several beliefs that a person is obligated to believe, and not only to believe, things that a person is obligated to know. All of those things that a person is obligated to believe and obligated to know, the Ramchal says that besides the fact that we received these pieces of information about God from Har Sinai, and it was handed down generation after generation all the way till today, and we know them by tradition, we are also able to reason all of these things about God. Omnom gam mitzad hachakira b'moifsim halimudiyim ye'omsu kol ha'inyonim ha'ela v'yuchach heyoisam kein mikoyach hanimtsois u'masigehem asher nachnu royim be'inenu. All of these things that we know by tradition, we also able to reason them. Now, just incidentally, we need to know that the primary way we know this is through tradition. Reasoning is only secondary. Our main reason for emunah, our main reason why we believe, is because of the Messiah that we have from Har Sinai. However, it happens to be true that these pieces of information about Hashem, we can also reason them. And let's see what the Ramchal lists. Number 1. Kol Ishmi Yisrael Tzor Shiyamin V'Yeda. Everybody, all Jewish people have to believe and they have to know. Sheyesha Motzui Rishon Kadmoin V'Nitzchi. That there is a first entity. Kadmoin V'Nitzchi is eternal. Was here before everything and will be here after everything. Kadmoin means means it has no beginning and it has no end. Above time and space. V'hu shehimtzi umamtzi kol shmashen nimtza b'metzias. And this entity caused and maintains everything in existence, v'hu Eloka Baruch Hu, and that's God. Notice again how the Ramchal first described what we have to know about God, and then he said, well, this entity that we know all about, we refer to as Hashem. The reason is because the Ramchal said the word v'yeda, a person has to know. And whenever we talk about knowing, first we know about the first cause, about the Mechuyev HaMetzias, which we refer to, then we label it Hashem. Then the Ramchal says, Oy tzorch sheyeda shehamotzui hazeh yizbarach shemoy ein amitas metziyusoi museges zulosoi klal. This entity is, we cannot conceive it, we cannot understand it, we cannot understand its nature, and we know that. We can't understand its nature because we've never experienced something eternal. We've never experienced the Mechuyev HaMetzias. We've never experienced something that's Kulei Poshet. Oy tzorch sheyeda. We also need to know about Hashem. Shehamotzui hazeh yizbarach shemoy. This entity that created the world, this first cause. Hine metziyusoi metzios muchrach. Sheyefshe ha'odrei klal. It's a muchrach HaMetzias, a Mechuyev HaMetzias. It's not possible not to exist. The Ramchal means more than just that God can't die or God can't disappear. What he means is that non-existence was never an option for Hashem, for the Mechuyev HaMetzias. Oid tzarich sheyeda, we also need to know shemitziuso yizbarach shmoi einoi toli bezulosoi klal ela miatzmei hu mukhrach HaMetzias. This that God has to be here is not because there's a reason why he's invulnerable to death and invulnerable to non-existence. There's some reason or some cause that protects him from disappearing. No. It's not that there's a cause or a reason that causes him to be Mukhrach HaMetzias, but rather his nature itself, intrinsically, Hashem is a Mechuyev HaMetzias, and non-existence was never an option. V'chein tzarich sheyeda, also, shemitziuso yizbarach shmoi metzius poshut b'li harkava v'riboy klal, that Hashem is kuloi poshut. He's not composite, he has no components, he exists totally simple, kuloi poshut. We mentioned that as well. Umimashet tzarich sheyeda oid, and among those things that amongst those things that we have to know, it can only be one and not more than one. And we explained why this is so as well. Because without parameters, without boundaries, without scope, you can't have quantification. So not only, in conclusion, not only do Jews not need a leap of faith, quote unquote, to believe in the existence of God. Not only is the existence of God clearly demonstrated by logical proof, but also what we know about God, that he's a Siva Rishona, that he's a Mechuyev HaMetzias, that he's Kuloi Poshut, that he's L'mayil min HaTeva and L'mayil min HaZman, and that he's not multiple, he's one and not two. All of those things that we know about God, all of the things that make Hashem Hashem, the Hashem that we worship as opposed to anybody else's God, our Hashem, Yud Kei Vav Kei, all the things that we know about Hashem, those things too are easily demonstrated through logical proof.